All right, we got some people coming in. Hello, people.
Hello, people. This is the voice of God.
Right.
That's what it
This
sounds
is
like
the
at this point.
disembodied voice from behind the graphic. All right. Let's get ready to do the thing. Where's my. Here it is.
Here we are.
Here we are. All right. Welcome in to the DNVR Rockies podcast presented by Strava Craft Coffee. Use that promo code DNVR. You'll get 20% off your next purchase of that CBD infused, deliciously rich, potentially life changing coffee. Strava. I've got some right here. Everyone on the lives can see I'm enjoying. Of course, I am your host, Drew Creasman. With me is our guy, Patrick Lyons. And on this episode, we're going to get heavy into some draft talk. We're going to be talking about a few other miscellaneous things, looking at some drafts passed from your Colorado Rockies. But what I really wanted to do with this conversation is we've danced around it a little bit. I've talked about a couple of strategic things, a couple of players I like, and then we had our guy from Purple Row on, Justin Wick, who, how awesome was he, by the way? He was
Great
just
guest.
fantastic,
Great
yeah.
guest.
And he ran through, some of his prospect leanings and some draft thoughts. But I want us to take a step back. This is where all right, let's take a wide angle view here and talk about, just philosophically speaking, how Colorado should and likely will approach the entire draft. I focused in a lot on that first pick and a few, like, why don't they do catchers? And we've got a lot more coming on that, both in terms of written content. We might get into it a little bit here today on the pod. But Patrick, I wanted to ask you, as someone who hasn't grown up around the team, but has a really good background in amateur baseball and in sort of just draft history. What is your philosophical take on the Rockies in particular? Are there things from a draft perspective that they need to do differently than other teams? And if so, do you think that they're going to get those things right in this one, and how have they been doing lately from your perspective?
I think in many ways Colorado does need to behave a little bit differently than most other teams in Major League Baseball, most obviously referring to starting pitching. I would say relief pitching, but relievers aren't born. They're converted from unsuccessful starting pitchers. So
Right.
starting pitching is definitely one of those areas that they need to target. And, I think they've been doing that over the last few years. Maybe they're not maybe. I know, the last couple years they have, targeted hitters because that may have been the best player on the board that they've become most enamored with. Obviously, last year, 2019, Michael Toglia out of UCLA. With their competitive balance pick in 2018, they went with another first baseman, Grant Levine, who was the first prep player to ever be drafted out of the state of New Hampshire. Before that, in 2017, they did not have a first-round pick because of Ian Desmond. They went with Ryan Valade. So, they have gone with the bats because I feel that's who they've deemed to be the best available player at that spot. But, yes, they do need to approach the draft a bit differently as far as going after those college players. And this year, with there being such an abundance of college arms available, I think they really have an opportunity now to go all in on this idea of just stockpiling as many arms as possible, partially because the draft is only 5 rounds. And we could talk about the implications of that, as well as the lack of the minor league season and what you're going to do to develop some of these younger players. So ultimately, again, just to get back to your question, yeah, they do need to approach things a bit differently because, frankly, you can get away with putting certain hitters on the diamond for Colorado, and they're going to go out and have a 90 RBI season. It's really just about the adjustments that you can make going down to sea level. That's the biggest factor of all Colorado Rockies players. They're going to hit at Coors Field, but can they make adjustments? And I think you can find players that can do that on the offensive side. You just might not be able to find pitchers that can not only just make that adjustment, but can pitch in the unfriendly confines of Coors Field.
100%. And that framing is perfect for the next question I have for you, because you've just laid it out for us. I could not agree more. I thought maybe we were going to have a little bit more disagreement. We might have to fight about catchers just to do that. And then we'll probably end up agreeing too, which will be annoying. But as you've just laid it out here, there have been times, I think Brendan Rodgers is another good example, where the Rockies just, you take the best player on the board with that pick. Taking anybody else would have been a massive overthink by the Rockies in that draft. And they did the right thing despite this. And I go extreme with it. The pitching should be priority 1, 2, and 3. If I was in there, if I'm running the Rockies war room right now, and it's semi-feasible to take 5 pitchers with 5 picks, I would probably be running that. Now, that might be a bit extreme. You know, you've gotten a really great glimpse at this class. We both have, reading over some Baseball America, some MLB Pipeline. Those have been great resources. Prospects Live is a really great resource. Anyone out there trying to, bone up on some of this as we approach the draft. Again, it's June 10th. We're going to have live coverage of it for the entire first round. We're going to have all kinds of guests, players, people in and around the organization, media people.
And we do plan on having a Hall of Famer, because the Broncos guys, they had Steve Atwater on.
That's right.
And that was one of the things atop the list for Drew and I. He said, oh, man, it's going to be hard to beat. How are we going to get a Hall of Famer?
Yeah.
We got one. Confirmed it again last night. Confirmed it again.
We got him. Ladies and gentlemen, we got him. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But as you've studied this class, this has emerged again, I think, because, now correct me if I'm wrong here, we've discussed this a little bit, and we're obviously going to dive into it during our draft coverage. It seems like a pretty deep class of pitchers, and I have seen the argument that despite everything we've laid out here, and the Rockies having the number 9 overall pick, that should a potential, superstar position player be on the board, that they could afford to take that guy at 9, because at picks 35 and 46, there should still be some good pitching talent on the table. Is the pitching talent really that deep? Would you entertain that strategy?
It's a great question. I don't think there are. I think there's probably one guy that you might make that exception for. Now, to go back to something I kind of touched on in the last question, is there's no minor league season right now. There's not going to be for 2020. There might not even be a 2020 MLB season.
Right.
That being said, it's going to be hard to develop some of these high school players, right? They're not going to get in-game experience, and at the earliest, they're not going to play their first game in the organization until April, and that's valuable time right there. So I think it's really hard to go that route. Now, that being said, the Rockies have had a lot of success. I mean, you look at 3 of their all-stars from last year, they were all selected out of high school. David Dahl, Trevor Story, Nolan Arenado.
Good players.
And had this season gone off without a hitch, you would have had a 4th. And Ryan McMahon, no two ways about it. That was the next guy on the come-up. So Rockies have done a good job with those high-end guys. That being said, if Zach Veen should somehow fall to 9, it's going to be really hard to pass him up unless one of those other guys that they like a lot is there, like a Max Meyer. Max Meyer would probably, be the guy that I would hope falls to them. If we're really digging into it, the medicals on Emerson Hancock are up in the air. It's a little questionable what teams are seeing there. He was a guy that should have probably been projected as the first pitcher off the board. Now that's almost assuredly going to be Ace Lacy. There's even been reports recently by Baseball America, as you mentioned, that the Orioles may be trying to cut a deal with Zach Veen at the 2 pick, because they're going to go again at 30, and they might be able to get another guy above slot value. So there's so much movement within that first round. A guy that, is projected to go outside of the top 10. There's 2 guys outside of the top 10 that are right in the general neck of the woods of the Pittsburgh Pirates. You got high school outfielder Austin Hendrick, and you also have Nick Bitsko from Pennsylvania, who reclassified to be in this draft. He was a guy that was supposed to be ready in 2021. He's ready now in 2020. If Pittsburgh decides they want a Pennsylvania kid at 7, now that's going to, again, move somebody else further down.
If Emerson Hancock falls to 9, don't do this to me. Don't get me thinking Emerson Hancock could fall to 9. Whoa.
And that's the beauty and the insanity of the MLB draft, because maybe the best arm in the entire draft is Jared Kelly out of the state of Texas. Again, high school guy. But he's now slated to maybe fall to the Orioles at 30 because of his demands. So so much is up in the air. I think, again, Zach Veen's going to be hard to say no to, but I would understand that if they were able to nab a college arm there. Nick Gonzalez would be the only other hitter I think that has the potential to fall. Again, if Zach Veen jumps ahead of Gonzalez and goes to the Orioles, and Pittsburgh decides to pass on Gonzalez and go with someone like Austin Hendrick, and the Padres decide they want a high school bat, Robert Hassel III is a guy that I've seen projected that the Padres, seem to have some interest in. He would fit in really well with their slew of prospects. So there you've got guys that if you're just looking at pure talent alone or pure projectability, they might not really go in those spots. But if that does happen and Nick Gonzalez ends up falling 9 to Colorado, I think there's a good possibility they could take him as their second baseman of the future. I don't think he's a lot of people don't really believe in his abilities as a shortstop. He will get that opportunity, but I think more than likely he will be a second baseman / third baseman. He could play either of those positions really well. Coming out of New Mexico State, kid hit 12 home runs. Second place, by the way, this season was 9. So he had 12 home runs in 16 games, including 5 homers and a doubleheader. So the kid can rake at altitude. He's used to hitting. I think New Mexico State is something like 3,000 feet above sea level. So, again, he'd be that guy you go, okay, you can't really pass up on this potential.
He's also known for his eye. Like, again, now you're getting me. But you talked earlier about the going on the road thing, and one of the things that I've looked at over the years as I study the Rockies and the home road, the guys who tend to handle it better are the guys who take more pitches, who take their walks when they need to. You see more pitches, you're going to be able to see the difference between movement at altitude and at sea level. And the guys who are naturally more aggressive are just going to have less of a time to make that adjustment. If Nick Gonzalez, and with the Rockies' organizational depth at shortstop, with obviously, and that this has always been the silver lining too. If Nolan leaves, Trevor gets that money. Trevor Story's your shortstop of the future. Stop worrying about it. If that doesn't unfold, you've still got Brendan Rodgers right there. That's quite the extraordinary plan B at shortstop. And then they've got a couple other guys, Garrett Hampson being in the mix who can at least defensively play the position for you. A few other guys. Alan Trejo is Patrick's guy who's, again, defensively can play the position for you.
He could be a stopgap guy for, again, a couple years. It's a luxury to have an all-star on the entire left side of your infield.
Right.
We kind of forget that because you go from essentially Troy Tulowitzki over to Trevor Story, and you go, you got to have an all-star at shortstop. Well, again, Alan Trejo can provide a lot of levity at the position, kind of like Nefi Perez did for a period of time for the organization. Maybe Terran Thavra is the real deal. He should be playing at Lancaster this year, so we'll see what happens. You could see him in Hartford as soon as 2021. So yeah, there's a lot of possibilities there. To get back to your question, do you take Garrett Mitchell at 9 if he's there? Do you take Heston Kjerstad do you take a catcher in Patrick Bailey? Those would be the three guys that all have the question mark of, well, do you need another offensive player? Sure, you're going to get an opportunity at a 35 and 46 with those two picks, but are you going to get one with as high as upside as a Max Meyer or Garrett Crochet or Reed Detmers or Emerson Hancock if he falls? There are those guys that you're not going to be able to replicate, that ceiling. So you might not be able to afford to really pass up a guy with those abilities.
It is the question, which way they go with this thing. And it's, the other part of that is, can you balance out with the other 4 picks? If you go position guy at pick 9, can you get some really good pitching at 35 and 46? Or the other way around, I guess, is there going to be a point later in the draft where there's going to be some interesting position players? Because as much as, I would go extreme on the philosophy, that's so much easier to say than do. They're not going to take, I don't know, but they probably won't take 5 starting pitchers with 5 picks. It just, at some point, you do have to go with the best player on the board a lot of times as well.
Absolutely. And, who is going to be the best player on the board at 35? It might not be, that pitcher that you're hoping for. If teams go, all in on this strategy of like, well, let's just grab as many of the top college arms as possible, and we'll maybe see about trying to sign one of these high school guys in one of the later rounds and, throw some money at them. Maybe we don't know. Right, the last 2 off seasons, there's been talk of, hey, is there collusion going on in Major League Baseball? There's no evidence to that. It seems like it. Could it be that 30 teams really have come to the same general conclusion that older players don't really give you the value that
right.
they have in the past, or really just in general? Is it worth overpaying for that? You could see all those teams kind of coming to the same conclusion. So that could be the case with the draft. So.
Yep.
The Rockies, they have 3 picks within the first 46 selections. They'll have 6 picks overall. So you got to hope that they're going to be able to take at least 3 arms in there, at least, at minimum. What
Totally.
happens after that is really unknown, because while you can sign players after the 5th round to a $20,000 deal, that is not a lot. That is not a lot.
Right.
Next year's draft is still slated to go but slated to go 20 rounds.
Right.
So you come back again for your senior year, or redo of your junior year, I should say. You've got that opportunity to make a lot more money. Even if you're selected in the 19th round, you're going to make more money.
Right.
But what is your season going to look like next spring on the college campus? So, all right, maybe you say, I just want to get my career started. So there's a piece that will be going up in the next couple of days where Drew and I have our latest edition of Falls Count Anywhere, and we talk about, the state of catching in the Rockies organization. What should they do? And ultimately, with there not being a lot of top flight catchers in this draft, they might be able to go and convince somebody after the 5th round that, maybe doesn't have the upside of a Patrick Bailey, but is able to, provide a lot of comparable value to what a Tom Murphy, did for a few years, or the value that Tom Murphy would have provided the Rockies had there been a universal DH already in place.
Absolutely, 100%. Still hurts a little bit. So on June 10th, make sure that you've got your Breckenridge Brew situation all taken care of. You can get it ordered in from Davidson's. And if you want a recommendation on food, I say go to the Farmhouse. You can order it. You can go and pick it up. You can get $5 off both the food and the beer if you use that code DNVR. Call 303-803-1380. They're open from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. You can also swing by the DNVR bar to get some Breckenridge brews on tap. I assume that we're going to be live on in the DNVR bar all night long. So if you want to watch the draft out and about, as long as there aren't too many of you that head to the bar, because we are still being responsible in terms of our social distancing measures there. But you can come and enjoy the game, not the game, the show, the draft. It's still going to be a little while before we have games, but it's going to be a sports thing to watch and drink Breck beer and eat some barbecue. That's what I get from the farmhouse. I always get their delicious barbecue. It's free delivery. Again, use the code DNVR. You'll get $5 off the food and the beer. Make it an evening of good times as we run through what the Rockies are doing in the draft. So I don't want to overdo the conversation that Patrick was just having there because frankly, I want everyone to go and read the article that we're writing. And so as much fun as it would be to jump into the catcher debate, I think I want to put that till at least after we've published the article so we can iron out any other things that may be left to be said there. I want to back up for a minute also and talk about, just a couple of, I guess, what you might call nuts and bolts in terms of the draft. A few reminders if some people are wondering about, that 35th pick in general. Like one of the questions I want to ask one of our guests, those of you who can put two and two together, can figure out which guest that I want to ask this question is, what round do you say you were drafted in? The sandwich round, the competitive balance round? Do you just say I was the second overall pick? Do you just give them the number? You were taken with 35th. But Patrick, can you give us a little bit of an explanation on what the competitive sandwich balance round A1 B9 pick thing is?
That sounds like my order from Subway. Hey now. Yeah, for a period of time it was called a sandwich pick. David Wright was, frequently back on the East Coast during that life of mine. They always talk about David Wright being a sandwich pick, and those were compensation picks that were given to teams when their free agents left to go to other cities, and that still exists now. It's one of the reasons why the Yankees you won't see them early on because they signed, of course, Garrett Cole. But the competitive balance picks are at the end of the first and the second round, and that was something in the most recent collective bargaining agreement that was decided for basically middle to small market clubs. It's kind of it's not necessarily a lottery because it's almost like an every other year type situation where you'd get a pick after the first round, however many picks. So only 29 teams will be selecting in the first round this year. No Houston Astros. We can talk about that another time. But so they won't have a first round pick this year. So pick 30 is the Orioles because they had a first round competitive balance pick. And again, ultimately it was just decided that these smaller franchises and smaller cities, that since they can't go out and sign some big name free agents, they need a little bit extra support, a little bit extra push in the development of their prospects, so to speak, or at least the ability to select prospects. So that happens at the end of the first and second round. Those picks are actually tradable, which is really interesting because that's and not a lot is really made of those trades because for the most part you can't trade draft picks in Major League Baseball, but competitive balance picks can be dealt. Certain teams covet them more than others. I know the Marlins don't really care too much about them. They've traded away their competitive balance picks really ever so frequently. And as kind of we've been talking about with this draft is the draft doesn't necessarily get you. The Rockies aren't going to get the 35th best player necessarily. They might be able to get the 22nd best player in the draft. But what you get at 35 is a guaranteed slot value. You have a bonus pool of money that you are allowed to shell out to the players in the first 10 rounds. This year there's only 5, so it's only the 5 rounds. And I believe the Rockies, although they have the 9th pick because they had the 9th worst record, they have the 7th most money in their bonus pool because they're getting the 35th pick overall. So you have this money, you have this pool of money that you can go from, and if you decide to call up someone like Austin Wells, who's deemed possibly the second best catcher in the draft behind Patrick Bailey, and say, look, you were probably supposed to go, 25th, maybe 30th, maybe even later than that. We're going to take you at 9, and we're going to offer you that money that you were going to get at the 20th pick. So now you're getting he would be getting a little bit more than what he was expecting, and the Rockies end up saving money. Now that extra money they can go and take at 35, player number 20.
Right.
Because you say, hey, look, I know you slipped because you told teams this is how much money you wanted, and they didn't want to give that to you. Well, guess what? We're going to give it to you. So you can, have your cake and eat it too in a lot of ways with the MLB
Jared
draft.
Kelly's still on the board at 35 because
Exactly.
of his money demands. And the Rockies have taken, instead of one of those top guys at 9, maybe Patrick Bailey is not that much farther back. They probably have to slip further. They probably still can't get a guy like that. Maybe one of those high school catchers who don't intrigue me as much, but like a Tyler Soderstrom, somebody like that who's maybe slated to go around 17, 18. You take him at 9, you save some money, and then you get this fireball, and now you've got 2 high school kids with your top 2 picks. So we're going completely away from the the college thing I wanted, but that's an example of what you're talking about. You could get an extraordinary player at 35. I will say the last time the Rockies tried to pull this off, the guy they ended up getting with that pick they had saved money for, at least the last time, they might have done it more recently, but the last one in my memory was Mike Nicorette, who was a guy who was supposed to go much farther ahead than he did. It was a high school raw player, but he wanted a certain amount of money. Other teams were balking at him. The Rockies got him 20 or 30 spots later than we thought he was supposed to go. And because of that, I went, great pick. You got a talent who was supposed to go much farther. Unfortunately, things have not worked out well for Mike as a professional yet. He's still very young at 21, but in like 3 years, he's still in low A ball. So,
Yeah, he had injury, right? He had
Right.
to have Tommy John surgery. So, I mean, that really stunted his development. And that's, that can happen with high school arms, is because they've put a lot of wear and tear on those arms early. Obviously that's the age you're hitting puberty. You're having those growth spurts, and if you put a lot of undue and unneeded stress on your arm, I mean, frankly, some doctors say every time you throw a pitch overhand, that's not a natural movement. You're like dislocating your shoulder. So you put that stress on that arm, you're going to have those issues. So you take a college guy, maybe he's already had Tommy John surgery, and now it's maybe one less hurdle, one less obstacle. Some guys can have 2 Tommy Johns. That happens. But again, you look at a guy like Jeff Hoffman, taken out of East Carolina. He already had Tommy John surgery, and he was selected by Toronto. So there's less risk there than going with a high school guy that could be somewhat of a ticking time bomb.
Yeah. I mean, these are just all the things that you have to think about as a GM and as a draft guru. Bill Schmidt, by the way, and for those of you who are wondering, of course, Jeff Bridich and Dick Monfort and a lot of other people are weighing in on all of these decisions. But the name of the man, if you're curious, who runs the draft for the Colorado Rockies is Bill Schmidt. He's got a pretty good resume since he's been doing it. Of course, there have been some misses over the years, but he's the man who, if you're wondering, oh, Jeff Bridich took so-and-so. It's like, yes, but also, this is the guy whose recommendations they are listening to the most. I guess that's probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, and, one aspect of this draft that could be challenging or frustrating for some fans if Colorado doesn't come away with, someone ultimately that's exciting, right? And maybe their first round pick or their 9th pick overall doesn't have a lot of excitement, right? Patrick Bailey would be a guy, to me, again, as a catcher, might not be exciting. It's interesting, no 2 ways about it.
It'd be interesting, yeah.
It would be, right?
Yeah.
But it might not be exciting. But they might be able to still do that with pick 35. They still might be able to get somebody with excitement. So even if that doesn't happen and it really seems somewhat lackluster and doesn't have the buzz, I might be able to give them a pass on that, simply because with the fluidity and the toxicity isn't the word I want to use, but the vitriol or the vitriolic issues within this draft as far as guys being signable and how much money they're going to want. And if you don't sign one of your 6 picks, or if you're another team that only has 5 picks, that's 20% of your draft. That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
That is huge. So signability is huge. So say what you will, if Jared Kelly's still on the board at 35, you got to know you have to sign him. You can't just take him and go, cool, we got him. He fell, because he just goes, yeah, you know what? You're not going to give me the money I want. I'll just wait. I'll go to college. I'll move on from there, and that's it. And then you just lost pick 35. It happened a couple years ago with the Oakland A's, who got cute and picked an outfielder from the University of Oklahoma by the name of Kyler Murray.
Yeah.
Who never signed. Well, no, excuse me, he did sign.
Football
had to give some
now.
money back, and he had a Heisman Trophy season. And next thing you know, Oakland's 7th overall pick, they got nothing. For it. So you have to be incredibly cautious, with this draft, probably more than any other, because there's just so much unsureness, and there hasn't been as much time to build relationships with these players as in years past, where you're going out and seeing a guy 4 or 5 times in the spring. You already know you like him, but you're following up again, and maybe you're even having sit-down conversations with them. Now it's going to Zoom. That's a big thing. There's been a lot of talk from some sources that I've spoken with about players. Hey, man, this guy's been great in Zoom sessions. So now he's moving up boards, and some teams are becoming enamored with players. That's a reality. So, man, it's really hard this draft to figure out it's always hard to figure out who's going to go where, but it's going to be interesting, and we're going to have that coverage for you next Wednesday at June 10th.
It's going to be crazy. One thing, speaking of fun, weird, interesting things that have happened over the years in Rockies draft history, anyone who knows this, that they've taken a lot of quarterbacks, which has been trending back to your Kyler Murray. I don't think they've taken any Raptors players, so maybe we'll see if there's a market inefficiency there. Any rugby guys? I know, the Colorado Raptors, those guys they're set, but I want to find out how many ex-rugbyers we can get into baseball. I think that would be really, really interesting. Of course, you guys know that you got to check out the DNVR Colorado Raptors podcast with our reporter Colton Strickler, taking you inside the locker room, getting you 101 pods to break down the game for you if you're new to it, having interviews with players. We've been doing watches for rugby on Saturdays and Sundays with the hashtag DNVR watches. I've been listening to the podcast. I've been learning things. I've been watching the games. I've been enjoying it. I think you will too. You kick back with the Breck Brew. You watch a little bit of rugby. Scout these guys for some other sports too. You never know. You never know who might be the next guy to come into a draft. Probably not, but as we've seen lately, there are multi-professionals. Plus, you got to get yourself some awesome DNVR Raptors gear. Their logo is sick. Their colors are sick. And doing so helps them out. It helps us out. And it helps you look awesome. So it's a win-win-win situation. Check out the Twitter at DNVR_Raptors on Twitter. Make sure, like I said, you're subscribing to that podcast as well.
And Colton's breaking news all the time. Today there was an announcement of a new expansion team.
Boom.
In MLR, Major League Rugby. So check that out. He's going to have that covered for you. Not too far away either. So we could have the next rivalry on our hands with the Raptors.
Ready. I'm ready for rugby to come back, ready for it all to come back. I was mentioning it, and let's do a little bit of draft history, because we do have on this day a couple of drafts from Rockies past that I wanted to talk about. But the thing I mentioned a second ago, do you have a favorite quarterback in Rockies history? So for those of you to run down the list really quick. So Todd Helton was a backup at Tennessee behind Peyton Manning. Well, first he was the starter and he lost his job to Peyton Manning. So, and then there was, let's see.
Yeah.
The Rockies had drafted Mike Vick at one point, which is an interesting thing. Now, that was way deep, way late in rounds and barely registered at the time. It's just an interesting piece of history.
That might be my favorite, because
Mike Vick.
I don't know. I don't think played baseball at Virginia Tech. I'm not sure. It wouldn't surprise me if he didn't play at all. And it was like, well, he played in high school. I mean, why not? Let's give it a shot. It's at the end, on a wing and a prayer. That was the year 2000 that they had selected him.
You have to imagine
Russell
he had
Wilson?
a hell of an arm,
Yeah.
Vic. Russell Wilson is interesting because he actually played in the Rockies minor league system. You can find pictures of Russell Wilson in an Asheville Tourists uniform.
Right.
Like
That's right. And he's now ownership of the New York Yankees. So, in fact, we want to know, hey, where did it all start with all these Rockies guys going over to Colorado? Russell Westbrook was actually the first guy. Now, granted,
Wilson, but yeah.
Oh,
Well,
I said
Westbrook.
West. I did that before. I
was like, what?
Before, I think.
Russell Westbrook.
Yeah, Wilson was actually taken like in one of the Double-A rounds because they actually have a Rule 5 draft in for the minors too. Now, usually nothing ever comes of that. I think Justin Bohr was one of the few guys who actually, even made like an all-star team that was selected out of the minor league rounds of the Rule 5 draft. But the Rangers picked him up, and then I think the Yankees said, hey, they made a trade probably for like a bucket of balls from the Rangers, and he went and even had some spring training at bats with the Yankees. So Wilson, the first former Rockies player on the Yankees.
That's good stuff right there.
Kyle Parker, was that the next guy on your list?
Kyle Parker, he was not the next guy on my list, but he's definitely on the list.
University of Oklahoma, yeah.
That's right. And he's not even the only University of Oklahoma guy. Wasn't Holiday or Seth Smith? One of those good. They were both quarterbacks as well, and I thought one of them also went to Oklahoma. But I know both Matt Holiday and Seth Smith were quarterbacks. Ryan McMahon was a high school quarterback at Mater Dei, which
His
is
brother, I
kind
think,
of
is a
big deal.
great quarterback.
Yeah.
He's fantastic.
Yeah. And I'm sure there are some probably that I'm missing. Like, those are just the ones I can remember off the top of my head.
I could think of a few that if we asked, they would be a little boisterous and say like, "Oh man, when we would just play tag football in the yard, I was fantastic. Touchdowns, 50-yard bombs all the time."
Right.
Be like, all right, not too modest, but that's okay. I'm all for that brand of bravado.
Troy Tulowitzki was more of a basketball guy. He was a good basketball player in high school, as I recall correctly. There are a few others of those. Desi can hoop up a little bit. Charlie can hoop. DJ could hoop, but DJ LeMahieu is more of a hockey guy. On more than one occasion, walking through the bowels of Coors Field. I'm sure you know exactly where I'm going with this. You saw him too. He'd be out there with somebody with a hockey stick and a little net and like a narrow little concrete hallway. And we're just media walking by going home, and DJ's playing hockey in the hallway. Good night, guys. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, maybe one of the last guys you would expect, but then again, that's that Michigan background. It's almost Canada up there, isn't it?
It's almost. It's pretty close. Another guy who was an all-around phenomenal athlete in high school and still is today, especially when he stays healthy, was the Rockies' number 1 overall pick, number 10 overall in 2012, a draft that took place 8 years ago, if you've got your math together here. On this day, 8 years ago, we've talked about it, and we've even talked about a couple of names here. You brought up both Zach Veen and Mitchell.
Garrett
what's his
Mitchell.
first name? Garrett Mitchell, who have a lot of similar attributes to David Dahl, who may be available in a very similar spot, right? 9 this year, 10 where they got Dahl. So yeah, I mean, whether it's this year or that year, obviously, so it was 2012, and then Dahl didn't make his debut until 2016, I believe. Now, there were injuries in there, but is that the kind of timeline? Do you think you see that in these guys, and would you go that route?
Would I go that route as far as going high school player?
Yeah. Because we're back to that conversation again.
Yeah, going back to that, I
just
think Dawes was a special player at that point. And it's interesting because there are a lot of similarities. Now, the Rockies also had the 46th pick that year in 2012. They didn't have one earlier than that. And ultimately at 46 wasn't a competitive balance pick because, again, that was for the more recent CBA. That was compensation for, you ready? Mark Ellis signing with the Dodgers.
Hey.
Now, one of the interesting things is that the compensation picks, they would fly all over the place like
Right.
nobody's business a decade or so ago. There was even a player, and I can't recall the name, but I remember Oakland. They were just incredibly savvy, where they signed a guy who was released, and they held on to him, I guess, long enough where they turned around to just trade him, and they got a bucket of balls for him, or they released him. But because they had him on their roster by a certain date, they got a competitive balance pick because the guy had accrued so much major league time. So
Right.
again, they've changed the way these compensation picks work. Now we've of course have the qualifying offer, so it's like, wait a minute, you can't just get compensation for anybody, right? Hey, Rockies, I know DJ LeMahieu was an important part of your franchise, but you didn't deem him as, being like a franchise player. You didn't slap an $18 million qualifying offer on him. But ultimately, you know what? He goes to another team, too bad. So now it's only those higher tier guys, but they went and took Dahl again out of Alabama, a high school player, and at 46 at the time seemed like a great deal. Still is a good selection. Again, baseball is a crapshoot when it comes to players and their projectability. At 46, they took out of Radford University Eddie Butler.
Uh,
Now, and I'm sure you got thoughts on that too.
Man, it.
What could have been?
What could have been is exactly right, and that's just one of the bigger what could have beens from Rockies' recent draft history in the last decade, I guess, or so. And he was such a talent, and again, he was one of those guys who I think the Rockies felt like they got great value out of with that second pick. And when he showed up and started throwing 97 miles an hour with a wipeout slider and good bite and sink, and he basically plowed through rookie ball, low A, high A, and double A. Like, Eddie Butler was a part of a double A rotation featuring also John Gray and Tyler Anderson when they were still on the Tulsa Drillers. That was insane. I think like at halfway through the season, they all had sub 2 ERAs and stuff. Like it was crazy. I believe Anderson ended up being the Texas League Pitcher of the Year, even over Gray and Butler, who had more impressive strikeout numbers. Gray and Butler were roommates at the time. I was covering them very, very closely through that whole thing, and there was a legitimate debate about which of the two between John Gray and Eddie Butler was going to be more of an impact pitcher. There was the futures game. People who know remember Eddie Butler's performance in the futures game was insane. He threw some of the most unhittable changeups I've ever seen in my life, and it just looked like this guy's going to be a star. And Jeff Bridich has later admitted fault in seeing all of that success and all of the hype and the kind of groove he was in, matching it with the fact that the Rockies had experienced some injuries at the major league level along with it and needed someone to step in. And rather than just going to AAA and grabbing some organizational filler, they went and grabbed Eddie Butler straight from AA, ripped him up to the minors. I was there for that game. I believe it was against the Dodgers. It began with like a ground ball triple from one of those. It was D. Gordon on the Dodgers. Who would have been? Someone super fast hit a ground ball that popped over first base, and he ended up on third. And that was the perfect metaphor for how Eddie Butler's major league career was about to go. And then he would get sent back and forth, eventually traded to the Cubs, go over to the KBO. All kinds of questions about whether or not he ever got a totally fair chance, but also he showed on a number of times the propensity to completely implode when things started going against him. And it was just, there was and is so much talent there. And I'll even go ahead and say the other thing, and he's an extraordinarily kind person. He's a really good guy, and so he's one of the ones that personally you just go, I hope things work out for that guy. And from a life perspective, things have worked out pretty well for him. He's very happy in his marriage, and he's made money, and he still plays baseball as a professional. He's doing fine. But I hope the Eddie Butler story isn't over in Major League Baseball. It may be. The guy just, I don't know. He had it was almost all right there for him. Just one of those ones, man.
Yeah, it'll be hard, for him to come back. That's the unfortunate thing is, again, there's no baseball right now in America, so he's got nowhere to try to, regain some of his value. As you said, he was at the KBO last year with the NC Dinos. I think he even got the opening day start for them, and he could go to independent baseball here in America, maybe be some kind of a success story, much like Rich Hill was, where he pitched for the Long Island Ducks of the Atlantic League, and goes and pitches well out of the bullpen and gets a 1-year deal, then gets a much larger deal from the LA Dodgers. So you're right. He's still a relatively young guy, and you're right as far as that. This Tulsa Drillers team, those three guys were fantastic, and Tyler Anderson had a sub-2 ERA in a Texas league that is, it definitely favors the hitters in that league. John Gray was at 3.91, Eddie Butler was at 3.58 in his 18 starts, and I think that's one of the reasons. Although, again, we're going back to 2014 when he finally made his debut on June 6th, is coming up on the anniversary of that as well. That's one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of players. In fact, you haven't seen any, to my knowledge, since 2014 that have gone from AA up to the majors.
Yeah.
And again,
they made that mistake with Juan Nicasio as well right before that, and he flamed out as a Rocky and has reinvented himself now as a reliever, but it just doesn't work.
Yeah, only a rare few can really make that jump, and some just go to AAA as just a temporary thing to show, like, okay, no, this guy was ready. Like he could have probably jumped from AA to the majors, but now we know for sure that they're legit.
Impromptu trivia question for you. I don't have the answer, but I'm going to look it up as I'm asking you because I want to see how closest to the hole. How many games in AAA did David Dahl play?
So in his career, let's see. Would he have played with the Isotopes a little bit? Now, are you saying so before his major league debut or just in general?
Before his major league debut, because I'm going to guess he's had a couple of
rehab assignments.
Yeah.
I'm going to say I think he got called up pretty quickly that first season. Let's go 15.
15. Let's see what we got. Oh, I've only got. Show me minor leagues. Dang it, baseball reference.
Are you asking your Siri?
Here we go. Minor league stats. I can never find that.
Let's see if I can beat you. Let's play a game of search, hurry up and search.
Albuquerque. Oh, you were one off.
Really?
One off. 16 games.
Wow. Okay. I knew it was short.
He hit 484, 529, and slugged 887 for an OPS of 1417. He hit 5 home runs and drove in 16 runs in those 16 games before getting the call-ups.
Yeah. You got to wonder what he did that spring. Did Colorado think he was ready at that point? And it was just a matter of, well, we'll give you a little bit of seasoning. Hey, couldn't hurt. If you're still raking, middle of April or, the end of April, we can call you up. No harm, no foul. Or they're even thinking he's ready, but you know what? By keeping him back a couple weeks, we could get a year of control on his contract, which...
Well, and with him, actually, what's interesting, yeah, they've done that a little bit before, but what's actually interesting about Dahl was he began that year in Double-A and played 92 games because I think he had, the year before was the year he ended with the spleen issue. And so there were a lot of questions. So I think they started him in Double-A with every intention of moving him up to AAA. In 92 games, he really got the bat going. But yeah, so he played 92 games in AA, then 16 games in AAA, and then he made his major league debut and played 76 games at the major league level. Quite a 2016 for David Dahl.
Yeah, what's funny is that because 2015 he spent he spent the entire year, most of the year in Double A with New Britain at the time, and he ended up having the exact same batting average in 73 games in 2015 as he did in 2016. Major difference was, of course, got a lot stronger. His slugging percentage went up, and he cut down on his strikeouts slightly, but more importantly, did a much better job drawing walks, putting the ball in play and whatnot. So, yeah, he that was an interesting season. And to make it all the more interesting, in 2016, he didn't really have a home game until he went to AAA.
Right.
Because he was with the Yard Goats, and Dunkin' Donuts ballpark, hadn't been finished yet and was in the middle of a major lawsuit. So, you're right. That all goes into a player's development, and all goes back to the 2020 draft. And what can you provide these young players, especially if they're coming right out of high school? And we can look back and go, yeah, you know what? All of those high school guys from that crop, man, their growth was stunted, and a much fewer percentage of them really came to fruition and really developed into the players we thought. Look at the guys that came out of high school ranks in 2019. Look at the ones in 2021. No issues there with those guys, but the 2020 class, the exact opposite. So you just never really know.
One other interesting note on Dahl, because you just reminded me of it, actually had him on this very podcast at the end of that season. And I remember now, as we're talking about it, asking him, what was the most surreal part? You played in empty AA stadiums. Like, you played games that were supposed to matter, that were a big part of your development toward getting to the major leagues in front of nobody. I remember talking to Ryan McMahon about how just phenomenally bizarre that was, playing your home games in somebody else's stadium in front of no fans. I guess some of those guys are about to be prepared for games in front of no fans. Let's take a note of the 2016 Yard Goats. McMahon was on that team, Dahl. I'd have to look for, but there's going to be a few guys who are at least used to this weirdness. So then, as we mentioned, destroyed AAA, like made a joke out of the highest level of the minors. Made his major league debut, began his major league career by tying a 150-year-old record with a 17-game hit streak. But do you know what he said the most surreal moment of that season was? He hit a home run on a cutter at his eyeballs off of Kenley Jansen. This young man, earlier that year, 2-3 months before, was literally playing in empty AA stadiums as just one of the dudes. By the end of the year, after having made his debut and got this 17-game hit streak, he's taken the Dodgers closer deep on a cutter up at Dodger Stadium. Woo!
Yeah, absolute talent. And again, that's the ability that the Rockies organization can have in developing players. And they don't always turn out as well as David Dahl did and the other slew of high school guys that we've previously discussed. But when they hit as all-stars.
They
now,
do indeed.
Again, going back to that 2012 draft that we're now on the 6th anniversary of, in the 3rd round, they selected Tom Murphy. I believe that was actually the highest the Rockies have ever selected a catcher. It was in the 3rd round at pick number 105.
Yeah.
And again, we have the DH. What could a platoon of Tom Murphy and Roberto Ramos do for the Colorado Rockies in a 162-game season at DH?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, this one's another one of those where there are so many circumstantial ways in which this could have worked out for the Rockies and just didn't. There were so many troubling things that happened with Murphy between being drafted and ultimately making his big league debut, and a lot of it was injury based. He had very serious shoulder surgery. I think it was shoulder or elbow, but I'm 90% sure it was a shoulder surgery when he was in AA, which completely wiped out one of the major elements of his defensive profile when he was drafted, which was he had this great arm. And now he just didn't have this great arm anymore, and he was okay defensively. otherwise. And I think at that point he started to get worse and worse defensively. But he raked in the minors, and like you said, and there just wasn't a DH. And Colorado has put so much emphasis on defensive catchers that by the time he got there, and then injury problems followed him to the major leagues, and the Rockies and Bud Black just never felt like they could rely on Tom Murphy. And I 100% understand why. They lost a game in a year where they ended up in a tie for the division and having to play the Dodgers in 163 because Tom Murphy dropped a third strike and couldn't figure out how to get the ball to first base. And he made some really bad defensive mistakes. And you're right, it's just like it never would have been an issue. He'd be on the team and he'd be beloved by everybody today if there was a DH in the NL. It's brutal. I always like talking to Tom too. He's a good guy.
And we'll see what happens in maybe with the next CBA agreement in December of 2021. But if an automated strike zone, comes to baseball again, you're taking a tool, I guess, out of the bag of most catchers, of all catchers really today. That you're valued on your pitch framing in so many ways. So now really the defensive demands of a catcher are lessened, right? It doesn't become quite as important. So, again, in a few years' time, you go back and say, man, what if all of these changes would have come about a little bit sooner? Universal DH, not having to worry about, defense quite as much with an automated strike zone. Man, Tom Murphy would have been huge. And if the Rockies as an organization believe that the automated strike zone is going to be a done deal, now you can get creative in the draft ever so slightly. Again, maybe your sixth and final pick in the fifth round is a catcher whose defensive abilities are questionable. Again, in this piece that Drew and I will be releasing in the next day or so, I've targeted a guy who's ultimately an outfielder, but has some catching experience, can rake from the left-hand side. It's got a lot of power. He's going to sit outside the top 160. And if the Rockies go ahead and draft one of his teammates because he plays at a Power 5 school, then for $20,000 you could have another shot at Tom Murphy, if you will, in a scenario in which you can actually keep this Tom Murphy-esque player.
Where there's a plan B or C,
yeah.
There's some insurance there. Love it, man. I really do. And yeah, you can see some of the value that especially they could have had and in some ways did get from that spot. There's a few other guys from that draft I want to highlight. Before I do, I got to remind you that the Denver Rubber Company is the most reliable local partner for your long-term projects. They are an essential business. They've filled so many needs for several industries across the country during this insane time. They remain open to supply products to other essential businesses such as medical, military, defense, government, wind energy, food and beverage industries. They've been around since 1972. You know that they're the best at what they do. Family owned and operated right here in Denver. They're also die-hard sports fans. They're known for cutting and supplying rubber snowplow blades, but they can also provide custom rubber and foam gaskets, hose assemblies, and metal parts. Anything you can think of that can be done with industrial rubber or any of these other things, that is what you can get done at DRC. With their industry knowledge and their precise manufacturing capabilities, they are committed to supporting your needs, especially during these uncertain times. So be sure to call them today for any of your needs at 1-800-259-0010 or visit them at drcfirst.com/DNVR. These guys really are just the absolute best. And if you haven't seen them use their tools to cut through metal and rubber and stuff, like, you should check it out. It's just dope.
You're not, and it's true. I do agree with Drew. He's not fabricating any of that.
Wow.
Sound effects, folks. They are coming.
The wave of the future has arrived. There's an interesting collection of players that the Rockies took sort of from 3 to 8, but only one of which I can recall having made the majors for them, and that was only briefly. Was there anyone from that collection that you wanted to highlight, Patrick?
From the 2012 draft?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably just Matt Caracidi.
That's the guy, yeah.
Yeah, he's ultimately, that one guy that really did anything in the majors. Coincidentally enough, was also traded for the Cubs. He was the guy that came over in the Zach Ross Cup deal, and it was like, oh, Zach Ross Cup. This is going to be the guy. This is going to be the loogie.
Finally got that lefty they need.
Didn't work the first time. He's back with the organization.
I'll do it.
He's working
He
on
is.
some arm issues, but yeah, Caracidi, was okay, again in the minors, and didn't do too much in the majors, but that happens in the 6th round. Is that there's you're not going to get a lot. There was, I even heard something recently that in the last 30 some years of the MLB draft, that there's only been like 4 drafts where all 10 of the guys selected in the first 10 picks even made it to the majors. Think about that.
Right.
The first 10 picks, some of them don't, most of them, not most, but there are several that don't even make it to the majors in the top 10. So you get any kind of value out of the 6th round, like Matt Caracidi, and you bring back Zach Ross Cup in a deal, and maybe you catch lightning in a bottle. Didn't entirely come to fruition that way, but then you say, hey, we scored one. We scored one with Caracidi in that case.
Yeah, and then there are some other guys we get further down here, and this is only going to serve to highlight not having these rounds anymore, right? That we're only going to have, because when you look at, so for example, to go back up for just a second, the second round after Eddie Butler, so past the sandwich thing, that competitive balance we were talking about before, Max White was an outfielder who a lot of people probably remember for a while, a lot of power and interesting potential that just never came to fruition for the Rockies, just did not work out. Then we talked about Murphy. Then you've got Ryan Warner, Seth Willoughby, and Matthew Wessinger. And if you now I remember Ryan Warner a little bit, but if you are going, who? You're probably not alone. And that rounds out their top 5 rounds. So as Patrick was saying earlier, that's 30% of your draft. You got 3 players out of this, if you've only got these 5 rounds, that made it to the majors, and 2 of them are Tom Murphy and Eddie Butler. That's 1 player. If you only get 5 rounds, the Rockies got 1 player out of that draft.
Yeah, made it to the majors. How much did he contribute? Or how much value did you get out of him? That's the crapshoot of the MLB draft in a lot of ways. And this will be something we'll address on the draft, is that of course there are trades made all the time, so you can get players outside of the draft. You can also get international free agents. Right. Anyone that comes from Dominican Republic, Venezuela. Well, those are the 2 prime places.
The big
international
ones,
free agents. Cuba, of course. A lot of times, guys coming over from Japan or South Korea are. There's a different rule
right.
in place for that. So, you can get players a numerous amounts of ways, but the draft, that's the old school way of how business was done. It's still stuck around, but you got to get through so many levels of the minor leagues, and it just goes to show you how hard it is to play the game. Pete Rose said it, hitting a round ball with a round bat, hitting it square is just the hardest thing to do.
Yeah. I do want to point out a couple of personal favorites, just because these guys really helped me settle in as a reporter my first year doing so. With the 9th pick in 2012, the Rockies took pitcher Zach Gemiola, who really almost made it to the show. And, he also, I think, had some injury issues and didn't have like the highest end stuff, had such a good mind for pitching. Made a pretty solid minor league career out of it, but sadly never made it. He was my first interview ever. I went out to Grand Junction, and he threw a 1-hitter in 101-degree heat while he was under the weather, and gave me an extraordinary interview the next day. And so Thank you to Zach Gemiola. Another personal favorite who came out of this draft was almost the exact same stories like the second guy I interviewed, which is the 12th pick, Correll Prime. Great guy, and again, just didn't quite get to the big leagues. Had a solid minor league career, worked his way up the ladder, got close, just never put it all together. Before we talk about pick number 15, Patrick, was there anyone else that you wanted to highlight?
I mean, Shane Broyles was a guy who, seemed like he could have possibly been a solution in the bullpen again. If you need an arm here or there, he made it up to Albuquerque, and again, didn't really come to fruition for him, unfortunately.
We could also just briefly mention that in the 38th round, the Rockies did draft Dansby Swanson out of high school that year, but he, you may know this, did not sign with the Rockies. He thought he could do a little bit better than the 38th round, and he was right. Bet on yourself, kids.
And that's ultimately one of the reasons why the draft is, I think is getting shortened, for a lot of reasons. I think before 2013, there was 50 rounds in the draft. 2013, I think, was the first year that they went to 40 rounds. And even when you have a 40-round draft, if you go back and look through the archives, the Rockies, and the archives aren't that old. We're only talking about 2013. But if you go back and look, pretty much every pick from number 35 to 40, they didn't sign, right? There's like, all right, we got all the guys that we want. Now we're just kind of, we're throwing something out there to build a relationship. You'll see that they selected a lot of guys, a lot of high school players from Colorado, right? It's just kind of a, hey, we see you out there. They did it 2 years ago with Kumar Rocker, who was supposed to be a first-round guy who ultimately just preferred to go to Vanderbilt, much like Dansby Swanson did. And now Kumar Rocker is probably going to, right now, could be the first overall pick in the 2021 draft. So, again, Rockies take him late, have no chance at signing him. So why are there 40 picks?
What are we doing here?
Right?
Yeah.
All right, you only need 34, 35. Well, you cut out the filler, right? The short season baseball, you only need 20. And that's where we're at today, and that's what we're going to have going forward for the 2021 draft is just those 20 rounds.
And I think that's okay. I think ideally, honestly, for me, I don't know why, like 5 more rounds, like 25 feels a little bit better. 20 feels, but I'm with you. You're not going to find too many guys taken after the 20th round. You will find some, and you will find some Hall of Famers who were taken after the 20th round. And you will find taken in the 15th round in 2012, the Colorado Rockies' current best reliever, Scott Oberg.
Their BR? Is that
the BR?
Their BRRP?
He may not be the closer, though I think
CL.
he was going to be.
Yeah, he was due to be their CL, but undoubtedly he's their BR.
He is their BR, and he BR real good.
No doubt.
And had almost no, prospect shine on him. And so this is one of those things that always begs the question, what's going to happen to the Scott Obergs of the world in a draft like this? Are they even going to be able to sign? Because I'm not sure that in 2012, with what Oberg had done at this point now out of the University of Connecticut, I don't know that he was going to be able to just sign as a free agent somewhere, or he might have had to go back and play some independent ball, or who knows. But this is one of those things too, when you look at the names in front of him that didn't pan out, and then you look at Oberg at 15, you see the giant balance. Like, boy, did they get value out of that pick.
Yeah, and he was a career reliever. It didn't even start a game with the Huskies. So, Colorado, you say, well, we're going to need relievers. They can't all start, right? They might start to begin with, like a Yency Almonte, who makes it up to AAA and then eventually gets converted. You're going to need guys, a reliever, so be it. Stick around doing that. Again, Houston Street, closer in college, closer in the majors. He's first-round talent. Well, what about those guys that, again, just need a shot, right? They can do it, but they don't look the part. right? There's a guy in this draft that
Fabio.
Yeah. There's a guy in this draft that I really like. He's a Division III player named Nick Garcia, and he might be the first guy taken in the second round or higher since Jordan Zimmerman like 15 years ago. So again, he's a guy who Chapman University, and he's proven it. But again, as a closer, so you can't draft nothing but starting pitchers because someone's got to relieve at some point, right?
Right.
So again, to your point, what's going to happen with these guys? They're going to have to sign after the 20th round. I think there'll still be an opportunity for those guys. They'll probably make similar money for the most part. So I don't think it'll be the end of the world for them. But it's there'll be a lot more undrafted free agents, right, that we're going to see making it to the majors, and more guys with chip on their shoulders, and overall might be better. Might be better for Major League Baseball to have those stories. Might be better for the world of baseball in general. Instead of going out to Grand Junction, Drew, every year, and maybe two of those guys make it to the majors. Maybe one of them is good. Right. It's great if one of them becomes a future All-Star. But if in a lot of, maybe Grand Junction isn't the best example because the Rockies have had.
I say they've purposely sent really good talent there. Yeah. So they probably had a future All-Star on the team most of the last several years. But your point is well taken.
Yeah, because they've had a lot of homegrown talent. But again,
Right.
the Rocky Mountain Vibes, on the other hand, Milwaukee's top affiliate. I went to a lot of Lakewood Blue Claw games, and that they're low A affiliates. That's the first full season that the guys are playing in the majors, and I would go and scout players in other organizations, and there'd be one or two guys whose name had a little bit of buzz on them, and it never really came to fruition. I went to the All-Star game. I think it was in 2002, the South Atlantic League All-Star game, and I go back and look at the guys. David Wright was on that All-Star team. Andy Marte, who was a major prospect, again, had a very short career, and other than that, nothing. So
Right.
even 1 to 2 levels higher than Grand Junction in the Pioneer League, you've got guys that never become anything. So instead of going out and saying, hey, we're seeing professional ball players, we're just not seeing future major league ball players, could be better for the sport in general for these independent leagues to pop up all around the country and take the place of these short season clubs. And now you say, hey, these guys are really grinding it out. They love the sport because they're not playing for anything. And you root for these guys a little bit more. And if they make it, that's even better, right? Them having that cup of coffee is a story. The story of Jim Miller, the rookie, is a story because, he had stepped away from the game and he had defied the odds, right? I think he was still drafted. I think he had a very short minor league career, but he defied the odds. And with a 20-round draft, you're going to have so many more undrafted free agents. You're going to have so many more guys having to be forced to play independent ball all across the United States. And whatever this new feeder system is going to look like, there's going to be that many more inspirational stories to come out of that. And maybe that's one of the good things that can come out of this.
Yeah, no, I think that very much could end up being the case. I mean, it's going to suck for the Rockies. Let's not pretend like that doesn't totally suck for the Rockies if the depth of pitching talent has their choice of where to go. They're not picking Colorado. We know that, and so that sucks. But I mean, they haven't yet. Now, maybe it's a little bit different if you're really that far removed. But I mean,
well, let me say this because I agree. We've had these conversations before. Like, no reasonable pitcher is going to want to sign on with Colorado. Maybe you say, all right, I'll take some money just to get my career started, and you keep your fingers crossed that you get traded or something like that. That's not going to happen. But think about this, Drew. In the past couple weeks, you've had a couple franchises that have ultimately decided to not pay their minor league players.
No, oh yeah, now I'm with you. Yeah, I like where you're going with this. Yeah,
they have decided, we're a family here at the Oakland Athletics, and here's how we treat our family members.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know what? Pitching at altitude doesn't seem so bad when you talk about playing for an organization that maybe doesn't value all of the members in their quote unquote family. And there are a few teams that aren't paying their players. And the Rockies, well, right now they're only paying, I believe, until, is it June?
Yeah, they've promised through June.
Until June. So, if they come out in the next couple of days, they might
And not just their
change their
minor
mind.
league players, but everyone working in the organization, all the employees who've been furloughed. So yeah,
And the
this is an
Rockies,
extraordinary point.
yeah, and so the Rockies are again one of those franchises that preach family and have that loyalty. So maybe, just maybe, at a time in which you need family, you need to have somebody look after you in these unsure times, that you say, you know what, these guys put their money where their mouth is, and you know what, I playing at Coors Field and worrying about that's so far down the road. I'm not going to worry about that. They treat people well. There's one of their star players, Trevor Story, is coming out talking about Black Lives Matter. And yeah,
Right.
all lives matter, but some people don't get that. Some
Right.
people don't get that all lives matter and that blue lives matter.
Yeah.
They need to hear that Black Lives Matter.
Right.
And when
And the
your guy is
Rockies
saying
retweeting
that,
Ian Desmond's statement
all of
with,
those
with no
things
commentary.
have value. That's
Right.
right. All of those things have value. And if guys are saying, well, look, I want to just get my professional career started, $20,000 over here is the same as $20,000 over there. But you know what? I don't care about Moneyball. I don't care what how winning of a team the A's seem to have every year and defy the logic with the roster that they put together. The Rockies are a family that takes care of their family, and that's who I want to associate with. Maybe that is, again, one of those things that somewhere down the line we see the difference, that the actions that the Rockies take beyond the game on the field, we see the impact that it has, off the field with these players that they're able to take after the fifth round. How about that?
I want that to be the last word in this podcast. That was extraordinarily well done, sir. And from your lips to their ears and arms, hopefully, bring them all out. Bring them all out. Recognize, but yeah, I hope you're right. I hope you're right. Yeah, well done. All right, thank you everyone for listening in to this episode of the DNVR Rockies podcast. Make sure you're following us on all the social media. You're subscribed to the DNVR.com so you don't miss any of our articles, whether we're previewing the draft for you with mock drafts and some of these Falls Count Anywhere articles. Of course, we'll be covering all of the news as it comes in about when baseball is going to get back up and going again, what spring training is going to look like, how many games we're going to play. Anything like that happens, we'll break in with a breaking news podcast. We'll let you know. We'll give you updates. We'll have articles. So make sure you're subscribed to everything so that you don't miss out on any of that. Hit up our merch store. I think hockey stuff is still on sale. Something's always on sale. Get yourself some cool shirts and hats and DNVR merch. And remember, anytime you help out any of our sponsors, drinking a Breck brew, getting some barbecue, every time you manscape, you're helping us out. You're helping them out. You're helping yourself out because they're great products. And, during this time, as Patrick said, we all need to treat each other like family. And each one of those sponsors is a part of our DNVR family. So thank you so much for doing that to the best of your ability and continuing to be absolutely awesome. We will continue to be absolutely Drew Creasman and Patrick Lyons. And until next time, we will see you at the ballpark.